You happy?
You get the notification?
Yeah, we're saying we're streaming. So
yeah, brilliant.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, members and officers, for being here again for this Policy and Resources Committee. Unfortunately, for any member of the public who is tuning in, this meeting was unable to take place on Thursday because of an issue streaming to YouTube. So although members were here and officers were here, we were not able to hold the meeting in public, as it were, which therefore meant that we had to push the meeting back and to Tuesday. So I'm grateful to members. There is obviously time-sensitive material on the agenda tonight, particularly in relation to the discretionary payment scheme that we want to clear before Sunday, when the application deadline closes. So I am grateful to members for coming at short notice to a reconvened Policy and Resources Committee. I am also obliged to remind the public that the council is not in control of any comments that may or may not be being posted on the council's YouTube page at this moment in time. So if there are comments that are on there that are of an X-rated nature, shall we say, then we can only apologise, and we would obviously encourage people to go about their business with respect for other people's views, but we're not in control of that. Anyone who was watching the meeting that was held earlier on, this is for many of us our second council meeting of the day, and again grateful to members for coming on. But at the Staffing Matters subcommittee earlier on, there was a change of membership to this committee, but for clarity, that is to take effect from tomorrow, and therefore Councillor Rimmer is on this committee as a voting member, and Councillor Baggott is here as a group leader, as is Councillor Harrison. Every other member is here with voting rights. So we have 12 items on the agenda. As is usual with these remote meetings, I will come to each sitting member for your vote. And so at that point, I'd ask you, when we are coming to votes, to mute yourself. If you are not a member of the committee or you are an officer, I would ask, if you're not speaking, if you are able to mute your microphone during the debate. If you raise your hand, I will see you. I'll make a note of you. Physically raise your hand, unless you are, of course, Councillor Brown, in which case I can't see you, but I am confident you will make yourself heard. Okay, the first agenda item tonight is apologies for absence. We have a full suite of members, so there are no apologies for absence tonight. Agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Do I have any declarations? Councillor Harrison.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, in declaration non-pecuniary interest in item 7, the investment funding as a volunteer with the Wickford at Christmas group.
Okay, thank you. Any other member with an interest?
No.
There are no hands up, thank you. In which case we come to agenda item 3, which is the minutes of our previous Policy and Resources Committee, which seems a long time ago now, pre-COVID, pre-lockdown, back on the 12th of February. Are there any matters arising from the minutes? In which case I will go to a vote on the minutes from the 12th of February. Councillor Smith, how do you vote?
In favour.
Thank you. Councillor McGurran?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
Favour.
Councillor Blake?
In favour.
Councillor Sullivan?
In favour. We're not doing this voting hand thing with participants, no?
No, we've got to do a verbal for the...
Okay, yeah, but in favour, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer?
In favour.
And thank you. And I vote in favour. So the minutes are carried unanimously. Thank you. Yeah, we do have to do a verbal so that we record it for the record. Okay, the subcommittee minutes, those subcommittee meetings have taken place during COVID and during the crisis. And again, thank you to members of this committee who are also on the also on the subcommittee for Staffing Matters and Urgent Review. There are 3 minutes. We need to just note those minutes. I don't believe there'll be any matters arising for members, but if there is, I'll give you a quick moment. Okay, thank you. So the matters, so we have duly noted those subcommittee minutes. Agenda item 5 is the complaints, compliments and comment policy, and that is set out in your agenda. Shanna, if I can ask you to unmute yourself. I believe you are, sorry, Owen, is it you?
Yes,
okay.
Chair.
All right. I'll hand over to you, Owen, sorry.
Thank you.
The council welcomes all forms of feedback from service users and recognises its value in shaping and improving customer experiences and service delivery. So members are asked to approve the updated complaints, compliments and comments policy, which has been prepared with reference to the current principles of good administrative practice set out in local government and social care ombudsman. So these principles, which are detailed in the report, are getting it right, being service user focused, being open and accountable, acting fairly and proportionately, and putting things right, and seeking continuous improvement. The complaints, compliments and comments procedure sets out how contacts are managed within this policy, and that's referenced in the report. And just to remind members, there are sort of 5 stages. Stage 1 is the informal complaint, then stages 1 to 3 are formal complaints for escalation, and stage 5 is potentially a local ombudsman referral if the complaint isn't resolved to satisfaction of the complainant. Happy to take any questions on the back of the policy.
Thank you, Owen, and thank you for the report. I hope, I'll bring Councillor Rimmer in a moment, I hope that there is particular attention specifically for what a lot of our officers have been doing over the last 8 weeks on the middle C in this policy, which is compliments. I sincerely hope that the compliments that I've seen for a lot of our officers and for particularly our community hub and the way that they have helped and supported so many of our residents is being logged somehow officially, so that we know that we're also getting, you know, those officers who are performing those services are seeing those compliments that are coming in as well, because quite often with this it is always the negative that people tend to focus on, but there has been a hugely positive feedback for a lot of the work that the hub particularly, but you know, by the hub I don't just mean the guys who are dealing with the food and the medicine, but also dealing with some really difficult issues. You know, we've had the issues around funerals and all of that, which has been incredibly tough for many of our officers, and they've done extraordinary work. They've carried it out with huge professionalism and empathy for those residents, and I hope that the compliments that the public are sending their way are being recorded as well. So I think we need to major on that as well. Councillor Rimmer.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. It was obviously, I was been in discussion with Councillor Blake on this, and he informed me that actually we brought this in to actually include compliments and comments in there for that very reason, to make sure that it's acknowledged that it isn't just complaints and that people do actually receive an extremely good service from this council, and that the public want that acknowledged in some way. So it was a worthwhile innovation by Conservative administration, which is good to hear it's continuing. And what I would like to focus in on, though, is actually that should also go for councillors as well. And if you go to the website and you're looking at complaints, you can complain about your councillor, but you can't compliment them or comment on them. It's just a complaints process. And maybe that would take some of the heat out of some of these meetings and other exchanges if there could be comments and compliments from members of the public, or even from ourselves to our fellow councillors. But so that's one of the questions of why that could not be introduced into the councillor policy as well. Okay, thank you. That's I think an incredibly optimistic view of what could diffuse proceedings, but I am willing to look into it, and of course always willing to pay credit where it is due to Councillor Blake for doing something innovative in his life, so more than happy to do that. Owen, on the point that has been raised from Councillor Rimmer, are we just doing this for officers at this stage, or can we include councillors in the scope?
We can have a look at what we can do, Chair, and see if we can build something in. Okay, all right.
Ridiculous.
Did you have a further point there, Councillor Rimmer?
Yeah, I had a few extra questions as well. Yeah. on this policy. It was just to do with the 2017 policy. Obviously, that was actually to be read alongside the 2017 procedure, and we don't seem to have obviously that procedure yet in some sort of draft form to actually look at, and I'm just trying to see, will the same level of transparency take place for members of the public in terms of their complaint and how their complaint is handled when it's actually escalated up the chain from being a level 1 complaint to higher levels of complaints. So I realise, I think I'm right in saying that level 0 complaints won't be escalated, but they get triaged away. But I might be wrong there.
Yep, a level 0 complaint is like an informal complaint. So that's resolved. If it's not resolved, it go to a level 1 formal complaint. So that's how that would work. The complaints policy, the complaints procedure will be reviewed shortly. Obviously, it's referenced in this report as well. So it's the same procedures and processes still in place. And obviously, a key part of the policy is transparency to the complainant to make sure they're informed at all times. They understand whatever the reason for the outcome of their query and complaint is. That's always the case, and that will continue to be so.
Thank you. Councillor Rimmer?
Yeah, and are there any plans that actually make it clearer to members of the public at the actual front-facing web page where they are making their complaint? Because at the moment they'd have to actually go into an additional document to actually see the process that in terms of how their complaint is to be handled from that landing page. And I'm just wondering if there would actually be greater transparency applied to make it at least easier for them to understand what will happen to their complaint, their compliment or their comment once they've actually submitted it on that landing page.
Well, you can certainly ask comms to have a look at the wording on the web page so that it is as clear as possible for the public. So we can ask comms to do that. Councillor Sullivan, you indicated.
Okay. We're not using the voting thing on this either, then, no? The participant thing?
No, hands up.
No? All right, okay. Well, I've just got a couple of questions of clarification for the officer. First of all, could you let us know if the current or the proposed service standard is currently being met in the circumstances we're in at the moment? And then secondly, just with regard to a specific type of complaint, obviously the council gets lots of like insurance claims where, for instance, a dust cart has damaged a car, or people trip over and on council land and then launch an insurance claim against council. Obviously, these are dealt with via the insurance process, but in effect, I suppose you could say they are a complaint against council. Does this policy encompass those types of events, or is there another policy on which it comes under? You just clarify those 2 points, thanks.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the standard, yeah, we are meeting standard, and we're up to where we were pre-COVID. So that is being maintained and has been for the last 3 or 4 months. It's been on the actual standard is actually improving. As far as insurance is concerned, people obviously raise an insurance claim, and that's dealt with through a separate process. If there was a complaint against how that insurance process had been managed, then that would come into this process. Yeah, that makes sense.
Is that all right, Stuart? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
As a point, I can't. I'm not the host of the meeting, therefore I can't see some of the participant things that perhaps Karina can. So just raise your hand, and I will acknowledge that you are indicating to speak. Do I have any further speakers on this agenda item? The Chief Executive, Scott Logan, welcome, debut.
Debut this year, Leader. Just to confirm regarding your compliments point earlier that was raised, that all compliments from the public and from members are very welcome, and 2 are passed on to staff, and they welcome that positive feedback, as well as obviously dealing complaints, just to reassure members that it does get fed through to the staff, and normally staff would get positive feedback and reply. So just to pass that on, thank you.
Thanks, and let's make sure as well that the social media side of things is being captured as well. There's lots of really positive comments on the social media that are not formally being sent to councillors. So we can ask comms to be having a look through the various social media pages to make sure that those comments are being captured as well, so that can be fed in. Okay, no, there are no further indications on this item. So the recommendation is that we approve the proposed policy, which is set out in enclosure 2 of the agenda. I'm going to kick off and vote in favour. Councillor Smith.
In favour.
Like it. Councillor McGurran.
In favour.
Councillor Brown. Need to unmute yourself, people. Councillor Brown.
Favour.
Thank you. Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Sullivan.
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
Thank you. The vote is carried unanimously. Thank you, Owen, Shanna, and the team for your work on that. And again, please do make sure our comments are relayed to your various teams. General item 6 is the ICT strategy, the end user device procurement, and as such, because of the size of the contract, it is coming to us. Mr. Birkinshaw, do you want to introduce this, or is it Lee I'm coming to?
Lee's going to introduce the report, Chairman.
Okay, Lee, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. The IT strategy was approved at the 30th of January 2020 meeting of this committee that sets out a multi-year programme to modernise and replace key ICT systems used to provide services to our residents. The ICT strategy is a key enabler to the digital strategy and other supporting strategies to deliver change to the Council. The strategy outlined several key foundation components that needed to be embedded to allow for the programme of service reviews and digitisation of services enabled by technology to be implemented. I want to reassure the committee that good progress is being made on a number of areas, including establishment of the criteria and sequencing of the business process review programme, procurement initiated for the transition of our customer platform to the cloud that will provide enhanced functionality and provide a platform for expansion across Council services, finalisation of the resources required to improve our digital and technical capability required for the delivery of the programme. And we're approaching the completion of phase 1 of our GIS upgrade programme to consolidate our information held in our GI tool. Future phase will explore integration with our customer-facing solutions to present map-based information to residents. Completion of requirements for the introduction of SharePoint and MS Teams to enhance staff productivity and improve our information governance arrangements. The current lockdown situation has in some ways been a perfect beta test for the new technology we plan to introduce. The main element of the strategy, which this report deals with, is the replacement of the end user devices used by our staff. The report outlines the reasons why the replacement is essential. The Council will be adopting a laptop first solution with a standard desk configuration to comply with health and safety regulations. The adoption of this model will enable more flexibility for staff in where and how they work. This approach will enable the Council to consider how it operates in the future, including its accommodation requirements. Engagement with services has taken place around the requirements based on a standardised set of devices, and the Council is currently undertaking a procurement activity using an established framework in accordance with the Council's procurement regulations. The Council's financial regulations require expenditure above £399,999 to be approved by the Council. The estimated cost of the procurement for the end user device estate exceeds this, but the estimated spend contained in enclosure 2, which is restricted so that it doesn't impact on the current tender process. Therefore, to avoid delays, maximise any potential cost savings due to enhanced supplier offerings at their end of financial year, and ensure that the programme achieves the required timescales, I would draw members' attention to the recommendation that the committee delegates authority to the Assistant Director of Corporate Services to award a contract for the procurement of end-user devices to the successful supplier following a formal procurement process undertaken in accordance with the Council's procurement regulations and within the Council's existing budgets.
Thanks, Lee, for that. Can I just say, by way of introduction, before bringing in other councillors to this, a huge thank you to the IT team. Outside of this report, there are a huge number, £27 odd million worth of business rate relief that has been paid. I think we were one of the first to get our online forms up and running in Essex, if not the first, to get those forms up and running, which has been a lifeline to so many businesses. And I know that was it within 3 days or something we were remote working with a huge percentage of the team. So by the time the Prime Minister had made his lockdown speech, we were pretty much already at that remote working. And of course, March is always a difficult month because it is the end of the financial year, and the Treasury management, Mr. Larkman, I know, can always be his usual self when it comes to embracing change. But even he has had to admit that it has been possible to sign off the Treasury management accounts remotely. And that is, a demonstration both of how we should transition. And, I see this report as very much transitioning to that new way of working that we will be embracing. And I'm sure members will want to ask questions about COVID and its impact on this in a moment. But it's also a testament to how slick the IT team are that they managed to pull this all off as quickly as they did. So a huge thanks to Lee and his team. Councillor Sullivan has indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I've actually been working from home since the 17th of March, which was I think a week before the government announcement. And indeed, the whole of my firm, which is a large multinational firm, was pretty much working from home at that point. And the reason we was able to do that was because, well, several years ago now, we were all issued with laptops, as this has been suggested here, and people have been working from home quite frequently. So in fact, a large firm was able to go to completely working from home, almost, as a touch of a button, and has continued to work, as far as I can see, just as efficiently as it would have done if it was in their offices, and not just in London, but across the world. So I am completely in favour of this particular initiative. I can see the use of it and how it can work. And of course, as well, I think the pandemic has probably accelerated by 5 years a trend that was already long underway anyway. And in future, it will mean that the council could probably do without a lot of office space and either re-let that or move to a smaller building. So as I was saying, I'm completely in favour of this initiative, and I think it's not only one that is benefit, it's one we have to take. The issue I have with this item, though, is the fact that it delegates all of the authority of this to an officer. I believe that something of this magnitude really needs to come before a committee of councillors, of elected councillors, to give it the final decision. Otherwise, it's just an officer-run authority. Now, this would have been a perfect thing for a scrutiny committee to look at. But of course, there aren't any scrutiny committees, and the committees themselves have to scrutinise themselves. So, as a result of which, although I agree with the recommendation in as far as we're proceeding with this, I do not agree with the recommendation from the point of view that it delegates all of this financial authority to an officer. I think that's not an acceptable thing for a council to do, and it's not. The public, I think, would like to see their elected councillors keeping an eye on expenditure, especially this magnitude. So, Chairman, I'd like to make an amendment to the recommendation. So, could I go ahead and do that? Yeah. Okay. So, unless an officer wants to wordsmith this differently, so just following the final word there, budget, that we add the words following consideration by the appropriately convened member committee. Now, it could be the P&R committee, or it could be an emergency committee if obviously time's of the essence, but then that's why those emergency committees were created. So I think that therefore, if we could, if we could add that amendment to it, and then I would ask if there's a seconder, and then we obviously go to the vote on it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Councillor Rimmer, I think, has indicated to second that. So we've got an amendment on the table. Mr. Berkshire wanting to come in.
Yeah, Chairman. I mean, I think we've been fairly clear in the report that that is an option. So in the options section, we've set that out that it is for members to determine whether they're happy to delegate that authority or for it to come back to the committee. And therefore, Councillor Sullivan's amendment is entirely in order in that respect. I think just to give some rationale for the context of the recommendation that, you know, we're very clear with members that we're ordering laptops, we're ordering a set number. And I think it's just a question for members around whether it's what, with respect to members, what they may add to the award of that procurement. But as we've set out, the option is there, and I'm more than happy to bring it back and exercise the urgency requirements if necessary. We feel it is something that could be delegated, but it's not, you know, we have set it out as an option.
And there you were this morning saying you had faith in all of us. Councillor Blake.
Yeah, just want to sort of support Councillor Sullivan's proposal. I just want to make it quite clear this is not to any detriment of any officer. It's just also possibly safeguarding the officer when it can be reassessed and looked at by members to make sure all the boxes are ticked. So let's make it quite clear there's absolutely no criticism of any officer that would have been taking part in this. We just think it's a safeguarding issue more than anything else. Thank you.
Okay. Can I just be clear? I mean, in principle, I have no objections to what is being tabled here. But I just want to be clear that we're not in a time-sensitive situation here, Paul, that there's not, that the procurement is not at such a stage that a decision needs to be taken in the next week or so. Therefore, we wouldn't have time to convene another meeting of this committee.
No, if we can just defer to Lee in terms of where we are in the procurement process and perhaps just the potential opportunities that may arise to get good value. So I don't know, Lee, whether you can just pick that up.
Sure. The tender's actually closed at midday today, so we are waiting for the Council Procurement Service to make those available for evaluation. Through engagement with suppliers, some of them, their year end is June. Therefore, they have indicated prior to the official sort of publish of the tender that there could be, it's not absolute, but there could be enhanced discounts available at that because it's their end of financial year.
Okay. Well, we need to take a view on that, and if needs be, there is a scheduled meeting of the Urgent Matters Committee in 2 weeks' time. And if we are at a situation where we have a significant discount, I would suggest that may qualify. Otherwise, it may have to come back to this committee. Councillor Harrison.
Chairman, can I just ask Mr. Hessian, the laptops we've purchased during this period for staff, are they compatible with what we want to achieve with this procurement or separate?
No, they are compatible. They will be of a similar specification. We would probably use those as spares, or the ones that have been purchased for spares, or for temporary staff, agency staff. Okay.
In which case, I think there's broad agreement on the table that's fine if we can get a discount that is being suggested, and I take it we're only 6 hours old from closure of the procurement, so a bit of work needs to be done on that. Then it can come to staffing matters. Otherwise, we'll bring it back to P&R at a later date. So. If there are I don't detect that there's any dissenting voices from any member. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. All I would say is, being a two-hatted member, I don't have a single complaint about our IT. If there's ever been an issue, Lee Hessian and his team have been fantastic. Speaking as a county member, I would sound like the grump of the year if I express my views on the county's IT system. In brief, deleting members' emails, having a system that I think the guy with a three-wheeler yellow van dropped off. Listen, I think Basildon should run County Hall's IT system. They'd be shocked how good it is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All in good time, Kerry, all in good time. In which case, I'm going to take the vote on the recommendation, which includes Councillor Sullivan's wording that the consideration be given to following consideration for the appropriate convened committee to just sign off on the final procurement. I'll kick things off. All of that as one. I will vote in favour. Councillor Smith.
Hold on. In favour?
Thank you. Councillor Brown,
In favour.
Councillor McGorran,
In favour.
Councillor Blake,
In favour.
Councillor Sullivan,
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
Something in the water tonight. It's passed unanimously. Thank you all for that. Thank you, Lee. You are free to go back to San Francisco. Agenda item 7 is the investment funding. This follows the budget, again, seems like a long time ago, that was set by the council back in February, and it concerns allocations to the various service committees. Owen, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to the report that is in front of us, but I would just say by way of introduction to this, this was agreed by full council, the broad policy spectrums was agreed by full council, and this is the allocations to match the policy announcements. Of course, it won't be for the committees themselves when this gets to the committees to decide whether or not they wish to proceed in the same way, whether they wish to make changes in the same way. This is not a cabinet, so the Policy and Resources Committee is not for us to sit here and say what they can and can't do going forward. The envelope was agreed by the council, and therefore it is right and proper that this report comes to committee, and then the service committee and the membership of those committees has the opportunity to decide in light of COVID and everything else how they wish to proceed going forward. Owen, I don't know if you want to add anything at this stage, or?
Not particularly, Chair. I think you said it. It's really just allocating those resources to those service committees and jurisdiction of this committee.
Okay, Councillor Sullivan.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got, first of all, a couple of questions of clarification, and then I've got a couple of questions or points to make with regard to the recommendations.
Yeah.
So first of all, on the clarification, is Kieran's not on, is he? No, I can't see all the screen. Kieran's not on, it's just Owen, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so with regard to third recommendation, it says 50,000 allocated in the 2019-20 budget to support the activity of SEMPRA be redirected. So, of course, this was a budget that I put forward. So I had a look back at that, and according to the notes that I had, and these were the notes that I read out on the night of my speech, and also the notes that I had with regard to the member investments, the amount that was allocated to SEMPRA homes was 40,000. Now, it could be that it was amended afterwards and I've forgotten, or it was amended by the new administration. But nevertheless, could Owen just confirm where that 50,000 come from? Because when you look back at the agenda for the budget, of course, it doesn't give a full breakdown in the agenda of all of the various different member investments. All it had was that the member investments total 945,000. The notes that I had, that I compiled for myself, had that total of 945,000, of which this SEMPRA homes allocation was 40,000. Now, I know it's not a lot in the scheme of things, but nevertheless, it would make the calculation of the recommendations here incorrect. So could Owen therefore let me know if, where we got 50,000 from and not 40,000? So that's my first question of clarification.
Okay, bring Owen in on that one.
Yeah, so £50,000, without going into the detailed difference between the 40 and the 50, I can just say the 50,000 is what is unallocated from that budget from 18-19. The bulk of it relates to that SEMP homes that wasn't used. There may be a couple of other thousand from other areas, but that's what was unallocated. But the actual details makeup, I'd have to go back and detail to you.
So in fact that, so in fact that 50,000 is made up of something other than an allocation of 2019-20 budget to support the activity of SEMPRA homes. Is that correct?
I've lost you there, I'm afraid, Councillor.
All right, to repeat, that in the recommendations, the 50,000, can you hear me okay, yeah?
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah, the 50,000 is made up of more than the allocation from the 1920 budget to support the activity of Sempra Homes. Is that correct?
I'll need to double check it, Councillor.
So sorry, keep coming back. So therefore, well, does that invalidate what we got here in the recommendation?
I can recommend that I can confirm that 50,000 is unallocated and is available to be given to those service committees. So I don't think it invalidates that as a recommendation.
Right. So, Chairman, then if we proceed with recommendation 3, then it will have to be changed. The wording will have to be changed to make it accurate, surely.
No, because the budget position is that there's 50,000 unallocated. Councillor Smith, did you want to comment on that point or afterwards? I just want to make sure, because obviously it's your committee that you chair.
Thank you. I mean, I'm going back to the printed minutes of March, 10th of March of Housing and Communities Committee. The £52,000 is broken down on pages 6 and 7 of the printed minutes. And to break that down for members' clarity, 12 grand is for the next municipal year, 2021, Together for Safer Communities. 10 grand to celebrate VJ Day, and then £30,000 was the Holiday Hunger Initiative. And the leader will correct me if I'm wrong, that it was money saved from members' allowances being reduced.
Yeah, I think the issue that Councillor Simon you're referring to is an underspend in the previous budget. Am I correct in?
Yeah. So what I'm saying is the amount I believe should be 40,000. Now it could be you could bring other stuff into that to make up the 50, but therefore that means that the recommendation isn't entirely correct.
I'm not sure I would agree that it's not entirely correct, because as the recommendation makes clear, the £50,000 was allocated in the budget. So there is £50,000. So yes, you're underspend, if you like, from your £40,000, but the budget in 1920 topped it up. So it is the case that back in February, as is we're talking about here, the 2020-21 priorities, we are topping that up to 50,000, which is in the budget that's currently unallocated, and we are seeking through this recommendation to allocate to Sempra.
Okay, I don't want to be pedantic, but could I just ask Mr. Birkinshaw if he could just rule that we need to amend the wording at least of the third recommendation, because, you know, in the end, this has got to be audited. If we're saying that budget allocations are going to be used or transferred, then they must refer to the correct allocation. So could I, Chairman, through you, could I ask that Mr. Birkinshaw tells us whether we need to add any wording or take any wording off the recommendation 3 to make sure that it is legally accurate?
By all means, we can ask the monitoring officer if he has a view on it that he may or may not want to express.
Not necessarily. I mean, there's no. It's obviously an internal matter in terms of the finances that we've got available and the resources. So it's not necessarily a legal one. I think the catching the end of that to a point, whether there's some kind of caveat in there that seeks to do it subject to consultation with yourself, Chairman, just to give that bit of, subject to the resources being as was defined in consultation with the chairman. So whether that would just give Councillor Sullivan some reassurance, and obviously we can communicate to members the clarity upon which then them decisions are going to be implemented. I just suggest that might be a way forward for this evening.
Yeah, okay. Councillor Sullivan, we will do that and get you that assurance. I'm pretty confident, based on the budget that was passed this year back in February, that the 50,000 is a rounded up allocation of monies that is available to go into supporting the administration's views on administration's priorities on Sempra. But you had further questions, I believe, so let's go to those.
Yeah, yes, sorry to hog it all, but it builds up into one thing. So second question of clarification then is with regard to the allocations, 79,000 and 52,000 in recommendations 1 and 2. Have any of them already been spent by the committees that these are being allocated to? And if so, how is that allowed to happen if the P&R committee hasn't formally presented them with that funding?
I mean, Owen can come in a moment, but the reality is that those monies haven't been spent. Clearly, this would have gone to the committee back in March if we had been allowed to meet back in March, and there would have been an opportunity post the February budget for us to be able to allocate the monies to those committees. But there are a number of things where we have not been able to do it. So, for example, things like the community hub, we've received donations to enable us to be able to do the community hub. We've obviously received government grant monies to be able to do the community hub. That is not coming from spending from the priorities that were listed in the members' investment schedule or in the committee investment schedule from the budget. So that is the purpose of this meeting. That is the purpose of this recommendation, to enable us to do that. Clearly, if we think about VE Day, we would have wanted to mark VE Day. I think we all agreed at the budget time that we wanted to do that. And therefore it wasn't able, if we had to go down that route, then we perhaps would have done it through the staffing matters, the emergency staffing matters committee. But none of that has needed to happen because none of this has been put forward to the committees as yet. So I don't know.
Sorry, I've got to come. I have a couple. I'm sorry, have you finished? I've got to come back on that.
I was just going to say whether Owen had anything they wanted to add at this stage to that.
No, Chair. So these have been allocated. They've been for the service committees, but that's as far as it's got.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Well, sorry. So my come back on that is I was under the understanding that one of the allocations was for the town centre working groups, and I understand that a committee, I can't remember off the top of my head what one, allocated some of that money to a food bank. Now, I'm not going into the rights and wrongs or the whys and wherefores of it, but it appears to me that funding has been allocated before, in fact, it has formally been given to it by the P&R committee. Now, if Owen or whoever can say that I'm wrong in that, wrong in assumption or in my information, then fine. But could that be addressed specifically, please? Thank you.
Yeah, I can give you the assurances that you need that you're wrong there, Councillor Sullivan. In that, I will bring the two councillors who are indicating at the moment. I will bring you in a moment. The reality is that in the budget that the underspends that we allocated this time last year to the relevant service committees, the Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee were allocated a sum of money. That committee then last year allocated £5,000, a total of 25 grand, to all of the individual town centres. The monies that you are referring to the Helping Hands Food Bank in Langdon Park was part of the monies that were allocated last year by the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee. So it is not new money from this year's budget. It is already allocated money that went through the proper process through Councillor Harrison's committee, and therefore it does not relate to the monies that we are seeking to delegate to the various committees at this moment in time.
Thank you. Sorry, did you want to bring in others?
I was going to bring Councillor Harrison in if he needs to, because it was his committee there, and then I'll bring Councillor Smith in.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say, to answer Councillor Sullivan's point, the £2,000, any expenditure from those working groups has to be approved by the chairman of my committee, which is myself. And the £2,000 came to me. I had assurances it was out of the previous expenditure, which it was, and therefore there's no problem whatsoever. The additional money we're proposing in this is for additional expenditure, such as in Billericay, because in Billericay, the first lot of money went entirely on a quick fix to the phone call. On that basis, I thought it was unfair that all their money had gone on something which could have been spent by my committee. So that was one of the reasons Billericay and the others all ended up with another extra amount to spend.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I agree with what Councillor Harrison said. The original £5 grand put to the Langdon Town Centre Working Group, which I chair, it was put forward by Councillor Henry that the Helping Hands Food Bank be given some assistance with unspent money from that working group, and it was agreed unanimously to give them £2,000. I have looked up, in case anyone's watching this webcast, Right, if people read the recommendation item 1, that breakdown of figure, that breakdown of money for the Neighbourhoods and Public Spaces Committee. I've got it here from the printed minutes of that last committee on the 11th of March. And there's money for Wickford Christmas lighting controls, 2 water fountains, all of the working groups, 5 of them for the town centres, tree planting and Christmas event, street closures for Billericay and Wickford. So the money, the 2 service committees have agreed to what they'd like to spend. This is our wish list, but it's down to this committee to facilitate that wish.
Yeah, thank you. So, Councillor Sullivan, I hope we've answered the point that it's from.
Okay. Yeah, I'm happy to be corrected on that one. I mean, I think this similarity of names and allocations there.
Right.
Anyway, so carrying on to the 2 points that I wanted to make then. First of all, we have on recommendation 4 that £9,000 be allocated to reduce the total annual fees for each of the activity centres, the 3 activity centres, by £3,000 per year for the current financial year. Now, I'm not going into the whys and wherefores of, is this a proper use of this money or not? The issue I have with this is that there's no discussion in the agenda itself with regard to why this proposal is being made. Now, why these 3 groups? Why not any other groups? Why do they need this money? I think if we're or what's being proposed is expenditure of taxpayers' money, then that must be properly upfront explained, not just to councillors, but also to any members of the public who may be looking at this, to know how their money is being spent. Now, we just, out of thin air, coming up with that recommendation. Now, I'm not arguing as to whether it is viable or not. Presumably, we're going to be given some sort of verbal confirmation at the meeting of why we're doing this. But really, this should be a part of an agenda so that it can be properly considered before the meeting, so that we can discuss it in the meeting and then vote on it. So we can't just, I think it is not acceptable that we have a recommendation like that where we've had enough time to amend the agenda to put that sort of detail in there. Well, Chairman, I would like to know why it is that we have not got any of the details that I would expect for any proposed expenditure of taxpayers' money in that specific item. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Before I come back on that, I'm going to bring Councillor Smith in because he's indicated on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to answer Councillor Sullivan's point, the 3 groups are the George Hurd Centre, the Langdon and Pitsea Pensioner Activity Centres, and it was discussed at the Housing and Communities Committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Harrison.
Same point. The items referred from my committee came to that committee on the 11th of March and were agreed unanimously, as Councillor Blake will confirm.
I would agree. I mean, look, I don't want to, I don't want to be too harsh here. I think the reality is the sequencing post-budget has been difficult because of the issues around COVID. So if as always, we were in a position post the February budget meeting to have had the March P&R, we would have been able to allocate the money to these committees based on the recommendations and reports that had gone to the service committees. And because we're doing this in reverse order, because of the issues where we were not allowed to meet for some period of time, I think it's caused confusion. I think the reality is members of the council, not this committee, but of other committees, have had extensive reports and they have had debates and discussions at their service committees about the issues and about what it is that they would like to spend the money on. In regards to the recommendation 4, that's obviously, and indeed the others, we're talking about allocations to those committees and allocations to those policies that the committees have agreed to. So in an ideal world, we would have gone after the budget, we would have had a P&R meeting where we had given the money away to the rest of the service committee, and then they could have just on the night of Councillor Harrison's committee or Councillor Smith's committee, they would have been able to just rubber stamp the policies based on those reports. We've done it the other way round because of COVID. There is a significant gap between those, and I understand So that is where we are at the moment. I get that it's not ideal, but we are rolling with the punches, so to speak, because of the situation that we're finding ourselves in. But you can rest assured, you've heard it from Councillor Harrison, I'm sure, that other members of your group who sit on Councillor Smith's committee have updated you about what was discussed and debated at the Housing and Communities Committee, and therefore you can have confidence that the full, transparent, diligent scrutiny of how we are spending taxpayers' money has been undertaken by members of each of the service committees. Because I'm in a good mood, I am going to ask you if you have any further questions, Councillor Sullivan, at this point.
Yeah, okay, to finish up on that, so you were saying the 9,000 was discussed at a previous committee?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, then I suggest that maybe if that been put in there, because in recommendations 1 and 2, you mentioned they were at those other committees, so
point taken.
I wasn't to be aware of that. Okay, anyway, so the final point, in general, well, first of all, we got sent round a little while ago a note from Kieran Carrigan, who I'm glad to see staying on for another few months, with regard to the financial situation and the impact of the pandemic on the council. Before I say anything else, can Owen indicate if I'm allowed to quote any of the figures from that, or is that, can I not do that? The figures that Kieran sent round in that note, am I allowed to quote them here, or is that something that we can discuss?
Double check that. I don't believe it's part 2, but
I'm not sure what you're referring to precisely, Councillor.
They talk about the loss of income versus the expenditure with COVID. Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, the one Kieran sent round about a week, 10 days ago. Okay. Or Scott did, I think. And
Paul, do you have a view?
Yeah, just to say, Chairman, obviously we are due to cover that issue later in the agenda under the COVID impact. So if it is just a general debate around that, perhaps that can be picked up when I think Owen's provide an overview of that. But if it's something specific, then I'll sub that one.
Okay, all right. Well, so the reason I'll try not to quote from it just in case. So that gave, a very stark warning of the situation that the council's in. Obviously, we're not the only organisation in the world that's in that position. We're losing income stream. We couldn't have ever expected to have forecast this. So it's not unexpected. What I would say though is that in this agenda item, we're allocating 79,000 housing communities, 52,000 neighbourhoods, and 9,000 to the annual fees. Now, when you look at the breakdown of some of the things that are being recommended, and I think Councillor Smith went through a few of them earlier, really, when you consider the financial position we are in and are going to be in for some time, isn't it really prudent and responsible in these circumstances to review all expenditure that we've got going on at the moment as a general point? So looking at the specifics of those 2 recommendations, for instance, you've got in item 1, 10,000, that is for VJ Day celebrations. Now, obviously, I in fact propose that in our budget, but are we really now going to be able to spend that money? And if so,
yeah, I think I know.
How could we do it?
I think I get the drift of where you're going with this, Council. I think that the reality is the world has moved on, and I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And clearly, there were announcements made in the budget on things like VE Day, VJ Day, which you yourself raised for the August celebration. So we know all of those things, that obviously some of them, because of the calendar year and calendar month that we're in, we've bypassed, and therefore the spend is not going to be necessary. I think that the reality is we're not in a position of some other authorities where we have to freeze all expenditure because they are so close to the mark on reserves and on other things. We're not in that position, and later on, as has been said, we will have an update on COVID. One of the things that I was very clear about, and I raised this at Staffing Matters, and I asked that it does happen, is that at every single service committee, that there is a COVID report going to every single service committee where the directors, the responsible directors, will be taking their committees through the specific impacts on their areas. And later on, we will get for policy and resources, we will get that. But similarly, there will be the same for housing, for community budgets, for the environment, for the public space budget. We'll get all of that. And then it will be up to the members of those committees to determine whether or not they proceed or whether they review and whether they do not spend that money. That will be entirely for those committees to determine. I come back to it. We're not going to here unilaterally just cut off what those 42 members debated and voted on back in February. There was an allocation in the budget line to service committees. So those service committees will get their allocation. And if they decide that it is prudent to not spend it, because in 6 months' time, the world has changed again and it has become even more difficult in terms of the council's finances, or that the government has further reneged on promises that they made 8 weeks ago. Whatever the situation is, those members, I trust those members of those committees from all political groups and parties to make that decision at that time. So it could well be, I mean, we are talking here, is it 160,000 roughly is what we're talking about here. You know, those members can make those decisions based on those service committees, and if needs be, it can come back to us if they decide not to spend it and it is an underspend going forward. I'm going to bring other members of the committee in.
Sorry, Chairman, I was building up to a recommendation to be voted and seconded.
Okay.
Could I at least go ahead with that?
Yeah, let's hear it.
Okay then. Right. So, all right. So you preempted what I was going to say to a large extent. There are other things that we could have considered. Nevertheless, P&R committee is the one that's sort of overarching with regard to you know, the expenditure of other committees, and it is its remit to recommend whether this gets allocated or not. So what I would like to do, further to what I was suggesting, and in fact you acknowledged there, is that I would like to replace the 4 recommendations, replace them with this one narrative, or one recommendation. Due to the effect on the council finances of COVID-19, all member investments to be suspended and reconsidered as to their need, and for any deemed no longer required, surplus funds to be redirected to contingency reserve. So contingency obviously will be where we would help finance the deficit. So I would like to replace those 4 recommendations with that one recommendation. Do I have a seconder?
Councillor Blake is seconded. Okay, thank you. I am half tempted here, Councillor Sullivan, to say it is slightly ironic that you want to top up the contingency reserve when your alternative budget was to fleece it back in February, which would have put us in a real jam, which I think you yourself may even acknowledge. We've got an amendment on the table, which is to stop all member investments subject to whatever the recommendation says there.
I said suspended to be reconsidered. I'm not saying, you know, it's suspended. So it's not necessarily saying they won't go ahead, but I'm just saying stop, pause, let's consider if we need it, and if not, put it to contingency rather than go to the committees and then decide. I think it's P&R that needs to make that recommendation. But sorry for interrupting.
And I understand that, and I think the point of content, or the point of difference between, I think what we're both saying is that there will be an element now of reflection from each individual service committee about whether or not they proceed with what the council voted through in February based on what we were living through at the time. I think where we're differing is that you want it to be a decision that's kind of held within P&R, whereas my view is that the service committees and the members of those service committees, so a wider group than just this 7, have an opportunity to reflect on that and understand the full impact of COVID. But we have an amendment on the table. I do have Councillor Rimmer, and then I will come to other members.
Yeah, absolutely. I think these are unprecedented times. I think it's only right to have some sort of reflection on this. Obviously, we have precedents in this consistently from where we've had budgets that have been voted on by 42 members of full council, and then a new administration comes in and then alters that budget. And in this situation, it's not a new administration coming in, but it should be all of us as councillors reflecting on the new circumstances we find ourselves in, and actually deciding whether these are actually going to the right committees, and maybe it should be reprioritised. In this case, we'd say reprioritise for contingency for now because of the future needs that we can't predict, because we don't know if it's going to be U-curve, a W-curve, a V-curve, or an L-curve that we're going to face in terms of the economic impact and the impact on this authority, and we've got to be aware of that. Yes, we've got healthier reserves because Conservative administrations had people like Councillor Sullivan asking these type of intrinsic questions that actually get to the nub of it, and you know, I congratulate him on actually the questions he's asked today for that reason, and I'm happily going to be supporting his amendment, because it is a time that we actually have to reflect and have that moratorium so we get it right, and we get it right for our residents.
Thank you. It's good to see you still in campaigning mode there, Craig. Councillor Blake and then Councillor Smith.
Yeah, just want to comment. As I understood a little bit of conversation earlier, that some of this money has already been agreed to spend in the committee. So are you saying that the money that's been agreed in those committees, they can take it forward and they will decide whether they're going to continue to go along with that or reconsider it at their next committee? Because I totally understand it. If it wasn't allocated, here's the money, spend it how you will. They might take the decision to say, you know, let's be prudent with it. I think we already heard earlier that some of the money has already been agreed to be spent. And are you saying that that committee can re-look at that again?
And that will be a conversation, yes, that any member can have with their chair. And what all we are doing here, all the recommendation is doing here, is just allocating the money to the various service committees. That's all it says. It sounds very clearly it's to be allocated. So if you next week, and this is partly why I wanted the conversation that we had earlier on at Staffing Matters about work programmes and about agendas and about reports coming forward, I want members of committees to be able to influence that. And of course, starting from next Wednesday at MPS, you do have the opportunity to do exactly that. And I'm sure the chair who is on the call listening to your concerns and the group's concerns will reflect that in the work programme and what agenda items come forward. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I'm a bit perplexed because the Government Minister, Robert Jenrick, said at the start of the lockdown that he would support local authorities. He has given us the money. I believe he's left us about £2 million short so far. And I'm sure Mr. Jenrick is a man of his word as a Government Minister. And he's going to get his chequebook out and cover our costs for COVID-19 and all other local authorities. But when we talk about the money involved, when you're owed £2 million, it's a bit of a drop in the ocean. I'm sure, Mr. Chairman, you'd agree with me that a Government Minister is a man of his word and wouldn't dare knock a local authority in a national pandemic. So that's why I'll be voting against the amendment, because I would presume Mr. Jenrick is a man of his honour, man of his word.
I would echo the point that Councillor Smith is making, that the government, on the calls that both myself and the Chief Executive were on throughout the early days, I say early days, around the first month of the COVID crisis, the Secretary of State, as well as other ministers, the message was very clear: spend whatever you need on the COVID crisis and we will reimburse you. Thus far, that hasn't been the case, and we will learn a bit more later on in Owen's update about that. But I think Councillor Smith is right. You know, we have to keep the government honest, don't we? They have made a promise that they are going to reimburse councils for every penny spent, and I'm going to ask that they honour that, and that the people of Basildon get back what the government said that they were going to give us. I'm going to come to members of the committee first before bringing in group leaders. So Councillor Brown was next.
Yeah, just a really small point. I think here at the moment, we're all sort of acknowledging that this needs to be relooked at. And at the moment, I think the disagreement is where that, who is going to be responsible for relooking at that allocation. We often talk about the fact that we want as many members as possible to be involved in this process. And clearly the way to do that is through the committee system. It is not through P&R having complete control over everything the way the cabinet used to. That is a system we wanted to get away from. Councillor Rimmer quite rightly says that budgets are passed in front of 42 councillors so that we can have that scrutiny. At this stage, that's not possible. Therefore, the ideal place is within those committees. And it is up to each of us to be responsible for looking at that, making sure that we are abreast of what is going to committees, that we talk to fellow members of our own party and chairs and members of those committees to ensure that if we have any concerns, that they are aired. That is the way in which that system works. The way in which the system works is not for us as a small group of 7 to decide how this is going to go forward. It needs to go before those committees. It could be scrutinised by as many members as possible. And for those members who are much more abreast on the whole of their remit of their committees and understand when they what it was originally meant for, how that might need to change in the future and whether or not it's still needed, they are in the best place to make those decisions. I think it would not be right for us as a 7 to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to invite group leaders who've indicated. So, Councillor Baggott, you had indicated.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just reflecting on Councillor Sullivan's amendment. I want to make sure I'm clear here because, of course, you have said and other members of your alliance have said and reiterated it today, the parlous situation that the council is in, the fact that there are costs, that you're looking for money, that things are really dire. But what it seems to me is while the financial fire is blazing, you're handing out cans of gasoline to each of the committee chairmen to actually deal with it. And that seems counterintuitive. Surely what it needs is the leader of the council to provide that element of leadership and say, we need to reflect, and that's what we'll do. Because as it stands, I'm sure that if all the committees go ahead and the chairman starts spending money, that you will then not be so eloquent in saying that the council is poor and the evil government, because you will have been responsible for letting loose a potential spending spree when the council actually needs to be addressing its finances.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Baggott. I'll bring Councillor Harrison in a moment. I just make it really clear. It's not any member of the Alliance sitting here saying that, you know, we are in a perilous state. Basildon Council is, as a consequence of the COVID crisis. This is a pandemic that we have done excellent work to help to address on behalf of our residents and our businesses. We have put in place some first-class response services to help people, particularly those who are shielding and who are very, very vulnerable. And I'm very proud of the effort that those officers and those services have done and the work that they have done. The government have said very, very clearly that they are going to reimburse councils for the expenditure and for the loss of income that they have incurred. Now we have, as you know, we are taking steps to, as we would have done, irrespective of COVID, to seek to close the budget gap through increasing the commercial footprint of the council. And we have already met as a subcommittee of this parent committee to do that. And of course, Staffing Matters has already moved ahead with an acquisition through the alternative criteria that this P&R committee has agreed to when it comes to leasing arrangements and not just PWLB borrowing. So we are taking steps and we are continuing to take steps to find a way to plug the gap, both in terms of the COVID gap, but also the gap in our funding from the turning off of the revenue support grant that the government has brought forward. Clearly, there has to be a very substantial change in the way that local government is financed. And I don't think we should ever get away as a committee from being in the position of reminding residents that there was absolutely no certainty over how local government was going to be financed beyond this year. I cannot envisage a worse example of government than central government saying that that although councils still have statutory responsibilities at our level for things like waste collection and at the county level for things like adult social care and for children's services, that they still would not find a way of financing and being clear with those councils how they were going to finance it. It is a terrible example. But again, we have been promised that the spending review in the autumn from the government will address local government finance. So there are a number of things that are up in the air when it comes to this. But the budget position that we have passed as a council, the budget position that we're in at the moment, and that we will hear more about during the COVID update later on, is a budget position that included these spends in the 2020-21 budget. So there are not, it is not the case that we are adding anything to the budget deficit or adding to the budget gap by doing this. This was already accounted for back in February. I'm going to bring Councillor Harrison in now as he's waited very patiently whilst people have spoken. Now I'm going to move to a vote on the amendment.
Chairman, very importantly, I agree with your argument about the government funding. I heard the Secretary of State say quite clearly that no council will be at a loss for their expenditure, etc. on COVID. My committee will meet on Wednesday next week, and an item on there is the COVID-19 impact assessment. And I can assure members that we will look at not only the items referred to tonight, whether all or none go ahead. And to answer Councillor Baggett's point, we haven't looked at it recklessly in a bad situation. These allocations were given in the beginning of March before we reached this stage, so there was no sort of suddenly throwing money out on members and members' investments. My committee agreed the ones that we're looking at tonight from the Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee unanimously, and we will talk about it on next Wednesday, the 10th of June, and I'm sure we'll come to some agreement how we proceed. Because as a big spending committee, you'll probably find that Neighbourhood and Public Spaces Committee has it very hard on income. So that's another matter we need to look at in total. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. So we have an amendment from Councillor Sullivan that is on the table to replace the recommendations as set out in the agenda with a revised recommendation to in effect suspend the member investment schedule subject to further analysis on the council's financial position. I'm going to take a vote on that. I will start. I'm going to vote against the amendment. Councillor Smith.
Against.
Councillor Brown. Can we unmute ourselves? Councillor Brown.
Against.
Councillor McGarren.
Against.
Councillor Blake.
In favour.
Councillor Sullivan.
In favour.
Councillor Rimmer.
In favour.
Thank you. The amendment is lost, in which case we come to the substantive recommendations as set out in the agenda item 1 to 4. I'm going to take them on block. Again, I will start. I will vote in favour. Councillor Smith.
In favour.
Councillor Brown.
In favour.
Councillor McGarren.
In favour.
Councillor Blake.
Abstention.
Councillor Sullivan.
Abstain.
Councillor Rimmer.
Abstain.
Thank you. Therefore, the motion is carried 4-0. Whatever. It's gone through. I don't know how you phrase abstentions there. Okay. Thank you for that from members. Now we've got agenda item 8 is a review of the enforcement arrangements by the debt collection by one source, and we've got Rob on the line and Shanna who are going to talk us through this. This is in response to an item that members had asked for to come back and would have come back pre-COVID. Obviously, COVID will have had an impact on the work of this of the implementation of this policy. But I'm going to hand over to Rob to give us a verbal update.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My apologies, I'm not on camera tonight, not because I'm shy, as you know, but I'm on a works laptop with no camera, so my apologies. I was asked to give a verbal update on the one source arrangements. We've been working with one source on our enforcement arrangements for council tax business rates and overpayments of benefits since the end of September 2019. To date, we've sent just under 3,000 council tax cases with a total value of £1.5 million, about 150 business rates cases with a value of £720,000, and 642 housing benefit overpayment cases with a value of £1.1 million. We had a target for cost to be recovered that the council would retain. The target was for a partial year because we started partway through the year and was for £60,000. The actual cost recovered by the end of March was £69,000, which exceeds the target but was not excessive. And of course, this is all income that is now coming back to the council. It's helping protect the taxpayers' money. It's no longer going into the private sector. For our existing cases that remain with OneSource prior to COVID-19, all of those customers are being spoken to on a regular basis. They've all been offered extended payment arrangements, deferred payments, and payments holidays. There's no heavy-handedness with our residents at all at the moment. OneSource also have a dedicated welfare team who support their customers with signposting to all the relevant advice agencies, charities and partners, as well as offering personal budgeting and advice for residents. Any questions, please?
Thank you, Rob. And it's good to hear that the target has been exceeded on recovery of the outstanding debt. And again, on this, I know that we have, we'll come to members, I know that we have put a huge amount of effort in during the coronavirus crisis to help people, whether they move from 10 payments to 12 or the other way around, or whether we move them onto local council tax support. And that has been a huge task, and we are talking hundreds of households that the council has helped during this period as well with that. So a huge thanks to the team for their work. We took a decision at the Staffing Matters Committee at the start of this crisis that we were going to treat each household as individuals and not as statistics, and we've done that. We've offered bespoke solutions for each household during this crisis. That has taken a bit longer, a bit more effort, a bit more work, but it was certainly the right thing to do. And if there are people who are watching this who continue to fall through the cracks, again, we are still here for them. The community hub is still there. People should still get in touch, and we will still help them through this. The hub will be there for as long as it is needed. Councillor Baggott has indicated that he wishes to speak.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I mean, you'll know that when the pandemic first broke, I suggested similar measures because they were the right thing to do, and I'm not going to change my mind on that. However, it's just, and I don't want to be pedantic here, but under the remote rules for hosting meetings, Councillor Smith missed the entire report and hasn't been present for it. I just wanted to clarify that, therefore, he is able to vote.
Okay, it's a verbal update. It doesn't require a vote, Councillor Baggott. And just to put it into context, of course, at the start you were also alluding to wanting to explore council tax holidays, which would have been awful for our cash flow position. So the position that the council took was the right position, and it has helped. Is there any further points for Rob? Well, I would ask, because this, sorry, Councillor Rimmer, you did indicate, sorry, Councillor Rimmer.
That's okay, Chair. Thank you. No, I was just going to ask, really, in terms of this flexibility, in terms of the holiday payment, sorry, the payment holidays, in terms of any plans that have actually been put in place, whether this sort of, how long this flexibility is envisaged to last for in terms of your modelling. And it was just to get an understanding of that, and also to understand, I'm assuming, that there's been an uptick in demand for more holiday payment. So it's just to get an understanding of that, or when you will be able to give us an understanding of that, so that we understand the impact to our residents.
Rob, do you have a, sorry, Owen?
I was going to pick something up in the update later on. So some of the, we've supported around 3,000 residents in supporting them with their general, and moving them from 10 instalments to 12. I think it's worth members appreciating this is something we do ordinarily. So what we've done is done this a lot more than we'd ordinarily do it, because there's been more demand for it, but it's not something that we don't offer when people are in difficulty anyway. So that's just a fairly key point to members to be aware of. That's how the payment process works anyway.
Okay, thank you. Can I just put a suggestion that obviously this is a helpful, I think it was Councillor Sullivan previously who asked for this to come back. I think it's helpful to see and to monitor this, and in light of COVID, to be able to see it. So can I ask that we can do it when we get to the work programme, but Karina, if I don't remember it, please remind me, that we ask for this to come back in the autumn, as we're into the budget setting and we're into having a look at this more generally. I think it's useful to keep an eye on it as well. And perhaps, who knows where we'll be by then, but it might be useful to have a presentation where we can put the numbers on screen so that we can see it as well. If there's no further questions on on this item, I don't believe there are. No, okay, thank you. Thank you, Rob, for that. Agenda item 9 is the outside body nomination to patrol parking and traffic regulations, and the report sets out for Councillor Harrison to be appointed as the council representative. Do I have any people wishing to speak? Here we go. Councillor Rimmer.
I was going to, I've got in before Councillor Blake on this occasion, but I was going to nominate an alternative, and that's Councillor Richard Moore.
Okay. Do you have a seconder? Councillor Blake. Okay. Let's, unless there is, well, sorry, Councillor Harrison.
I'm interested. Yeah, I'm happy to do this. I just wonder, have we been on it before? Because this sort of came out of the blue. I saw the information that came from this body, and it looked as though we'd never been represented at all on this particular outside body. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but that was the impression I got from the information I was given.
Karina, are you able to shed some light?
Yeah, my understanding is we used to have a nomination on it up until a couple of years ago when we were told we weren't required to put a nomination, and this has since come in a couple of weeks ago to say now we do need somebody on it. So this has all gone via James Hendry a couple of years ago. So we did have formal notification that a member wasn't required, but they now require a nomination onto the joint committee.
Okay, fine. All right, well, we've got Richard Moore has been put forward as an amendment. So let's take a vote on whether Councillor Moore replaces Councillor Harrison in the recommendation. I'll kick things off. I vote against. Councillor Smith?
Against.
Councillor Brown?
Against.
Councillor McGowan?
Against.
Councillor Blake?
For.
Councillor Sullivan?
For.
Councillor Rimmer?
For.
Okay, the vote is lost. There are no further questions on the substantive, so we go back to the original recommendation. I vote for. Councillor Smith?
For.
Councillor Brown?
For.
Councillor McGowan?
For.
Councillor Blake?
Abstain.
Councillor Sullivan?
Abstain.
Councillor Rimmer?
Abstain.
The vote is carried. Thank you and good luck, Dave, on that outside body. Next is the COVID impact assessment, and for this I'm going to hand over to Owen to hopefully answer the questions that have been posed already.
Thank you, Chair. So the anticipated financial impact result of COVID-19 is currently projected to be in the region of about £4.2 million. It's obviously worth pointing out this is incredibly fluid, and we're monitoring continually really as the situation develops and really getting better information on how the recovery might work, how quick it might be, and how it might affect some of the services that we deliver. The most significant impact is the number of revenue generating services. Again, we've spoken about earlier, things like the theatre, community leisure facilities have been closed in line with government guidance. Obviously, this is moving, and some of these are looking potentially to open in July.
No, sorry, Owen, you're connected.
We're trying to model really how quick, like our attraction, other income streams.
Owen, can you hear me?
Yeah. Have you lost me?
Sorry. Yeah, you keep cutting out quite a bit there. It's probably worth starting that section again if you can.
If I turn my video off, Chair, that might help.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So the anticipated financial impact as a result of COVID-19 pandemic is currently projected to be in the region of about £4.2 million. This position is obviously very fluid as the situation changes, as you look at lockdown being lifted, but social distancing continuing, and really about how quick the recovery may hit the economy and some of the services that we deliver. The most significant impact is the suspension of a number of revenue generating services, including the theatre, community and leisure facilities that were closed in line with government guidance, as we've obviously spoken about earlier on. We're also experiencing material contraction in other income streams, which get into the community adapts new ways of working practices, parking, trade waste, building control, those sorts of activities that again seen a significant reduction in demand. We've obviously also got additional costs that are being incurred. We've spoken about some of these tonight as well. Activities for communities and businesses, a wide range of areas, coordination in community business hubs, and specifically in areas like homelessness service has been a significant pressure for us. To date, we've received or are anticipate receiving £2.2 million additional government support. So we've got an allocation of 165,000 additional to, or fairly recently, to do with the new high streets fund, when making our high streets ready for social distancing when they reopen. So the wider position in MTFS.
We'll never know the wider position on the MTFS.
The wider position in the budget strategy that goes to year and the following years going forward. It's obviously going to be very tricky. But obviously, we'll make some assumptions as best we can and share that with members and the way forward.
I wasn't being facetious. I don't think we heard your section now on the MTFS. Can you just repeat that?
Yeah, okay. So just the wider MTFS position is being reviewed at the moment, and as part of the budget strategy that we bring to members annually around July time. So that'll be that wider discussion for members to really input into that decision where we're going forward to help manage that financial pressure.
Thank you. Is that your update?
That is, yep.
Okay, thank you. And just to remind members that we obviously will get at the next committee meeting the outturn, but we'll also get or we will vote on how we are going to set the budget and how we're going to do the budget setting this year. And obviously, I think we've all alluded to, it will be slightly difficult, or even more difficult than it is in normal years, because of A, the remote working, but also B, the impact of COVID. Interesting there, the headline figure there, 4.2 million thus far, and we've received about 1.9 million in grants. So we are still out of pocket by the tune of over 50%. And I know that both myself and the Chief Executive continue to lobby the government for that funding. I don't know if, Scott, you want to say anything on that at this moment in time?
Yes, Chairman, really just to pick up certainly what Councillor Sullivan was raising earlier, and yourself in the debate around lobbying government. It was myself, actually, Councillor Sullivan had sent you that update around the reserves, and we will continue to update all members, both through my Chief Exec notification, and we will obviously bring updates regularly to the committees, both for the COVID update. And as Owen said, there is a moving feast. We have had many conversations with various different ministers, weekends and weeks, about potential further tranches of money. We continue to lobby government hard through our MPs around potential shortfalls, and we are assured by government there will be a further tranche, but that may well be towards around the economic recovery rather than dealing with initial costs. But as I say, we're using all of our means to lobby government and give them the facts through a document that Owen and the team pulled together that send off to MHCLG around our true costs towards COVID, and things like car parking charges are lobbied heavily from the DCN and others around actually how do we get some of those fundings back. So we continue to do that, but as I said, we will update members on a regular basis, both for the P&R committee and the various committees, on how it is impacting both the committees and us as we move forward. And we won't be clear on really how it's impacted on the council tax and business rates till further during the year.
Yeah, and I think because obviously the impact on this committee and where we're going, I have asked Owen to come back to this committee to provide a verbal update on the COVID impact to members pretty much at every meeting now coming forward. So it will be similar to this, a verbal update. And of course, I would say to any member, standing member of the committee, please do continue to get in touch with Owen if you need any further clarifications on this. Interesting point around the reserves that was made earlier on. Of course, the overwhelming majority of our reserves are earmarked reserves. They are not there for general fund purposes. general reserve purposes, I should say, the overwhelming majority are earmarked. And I think that we need to, as all 42 members, be making that point very, very clearly to members of Parliament and to government who might seek to say that we no longer need the money back from central government because of the reserve position of the council. That is not the case unless we are going to severely sacrifice things like the IT that we were just talking about earlier on tonight, and some of those other things that we want in able to bring Basildon Council into the 21st century and move forward as an organisation. Are there any members wishing to indicate here to ask Owen any questions on this item? No. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Owen, for that. General item 11 is the work programme, and the work programme you have set out in front of you. So I think we've added a couple of things here. We've obviously added an autumn update from Rob on the issue of debt recovery, and we've added a standing verbal update on COVID impact assessment, and getting to specifically the points that Scott's just raised there, and looking at our cash flow, the council tax base, what we're doing on rates, all that kind of stuff. Councillor Rimmer, you want to come in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. No, it's good that there's some items that have obviously been added. You've taken a look at the work programme and thought about that in terms of the impact. We are curious to know why the community governance review is still on there for the 23rd of July, and why that is considered such a high priority item at this time. I would actually plead with you on this one, because where other consultations have actually been postponed to give people more headspace to actually answer them and do a proper review, we're actually asking our local councils to actually be involved in responding to this, where they have other items that they need to be dealing with at this time in terms of their communities. I'd also say that when you're talking about engaging with the members of the public as a generality, but obviously they've got more pressing concerns as well. And actually to get a proper, well-engaged process going, I think we need to postpone this and ideally at least to the autumn.
Okay, I will bring Paul in a moment, because I did ask for some advice earlier on this in respect of community governance reviews. Because of the coronavirus bill that's going through Parliament at the moment, there are a couple of, well, there is an ambiguity over CGRs because of how it's linked to elections and by-elections. I don't know, Paul, if we have that advice at this stage, so whether it can proceed.
Yeah, I mean, that's not something I've heard it mentioned, but not something I'm aware of. But I am just looking to get some clarity on that. I mean, I think we're obviously conscious of the issues that Councillor Rimmer raises, and certainly when we do bring forward proposals to the July meeting, one of the options will be around how we consult and whether that review goes ahead. I think that it's right and proper for that to be done. I think obviously one of the issues, and a number of members very keen to see a Wickford Town Council established and following the petition, and unless we continue the momentum which we are on, that will not be possible for elections in May next year. So we're caught a bit betwixt and between, really. But I think I would intend to bring forward those proposals in July, and members have the options that Councillor Rimmer has set out. I think the further consultation and the detailed is not due really until the autumn anyway, and therefore members may be satisfied with that. But I will set that out. But in terms of the ambiguity you refer to, Chairman, not something I'm aware of, but I'm trying to find the elusive reference that may or may not exist to whether governance consultations can take place at this current time.
Yeah, so that was off the basis of a call with a seller earlier on today. So we can just get some clarity on that. But 23rd of July, we've got some time. And as you've just heard there, Craig, there will be a number of recommendations and options for members to consider on the night. Councillor Harrison.
And you recommended just now adding something to the work programme for the autumn. Is that allowed? Because I've been advised today that on my committee next Wednesday, I cannot add annual meeting of the council.
Ah, well, you raised a point to which I don't know the answer. Mr. Birkinshaw.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the full question. It broke up a little. Can you repeat it, Chair?
Can we put things on a work programme that go beyond the AGM until there is an AGM?
Yes, I'm sure we can. Obviously, if there's issues that need looking at in the future, those need to be identified, and we will need to just marry them across the appropriate committee as we go forward. But I'm happy to pick that up with Councillor Harrison tomorrow, perhaps, and just deal with that and make sure that relevant arrangements are in place.
I was only advised today, Mr. Bergenshaw, by Julie.
Yeah.
Well, let's pick that up offline. Councillor Baggott.
Thank you, Chairman, and I'm hoping that I will get, full member support from this. It's just where it goes from an officer point of view. I know that you're aware of this absolutely abhorrent racial issue in Basildon with a key worker receiving the letter that they received, and it's come to my attention as a result of that now that there's also been other incidents within Basildon with cars, tyres being slashed and everything else. Now, this is an emergent issue, and it is something that is absolutely fundamental. And when you see what's going on around the world, I do think that we need to be either via a strategy or some sort of joint statement doing something as a council. And I don't know whether it's PNR or emergency, the emergency committee that does it, but I do think that there needs to be, and I would hope that this does get cross-party support, some form of joint statement that the behaviour that we are seeing is abhorrent in this day and age, that none of us support it, and that we will do everything we can to stamp it out.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I know that we've obviously had a couple of reports going through the town centre committee, and I know Councillor Smith's committee on the Basildon Borough inclusive Basildon Borough policy programme that we put forward. But the case to which you refer, which obviously over the weekend I asked the Deputy Chief Executive to contact the district commander on, I think in the same block there was also another incident that was subsequently reported. So absolutely, when it comes to these racial crimes, these hate crimes more generally, all of it, we do need, you're right, to make sure that we're constantly reviewing that. And I know that Councillor Smith's committee has had a number of reports over the last year looking at this, and we're be happy to talk to him about whether or not it comes here or to the first meeting of Housing and Community Committee where this falls within that remit. But in terms of joint statements and all the rest of it, you and I can take that offline and discuss how we might take that forward. And I've got no problems at all with doing that. So thank you for that. And if it needs to come to a committee, as I said, we can bring that into the first round of committees. Probably Housing and Communities is what I would suggest. Are there any other points from members on the work programme or any other items that they wish to add at this stage? In which case we're asked to endorse, so it requires a vote for the work programme. So I'll kick things off. I will vote in favour. Can I ask members to unmute themselves? Councillor Smith?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGarren?
In favour.
Councillor Blake?
Against.
Against. All right. Councillor Sullivan?
Against.
Councillor Rimmer?
Against.
Baffled. But nonetheless, the vote has passed, and the work programme that we will all have to work towards and we can all contribute to and had ample opportunity to contribute items to, has passed. Baffled. The final agenda item is agenda item 12, which is the business rates discretionary grant scheme. And again, this is one for Rob, who will come in a moment. But this, there is a deadline on this in terms of applications, which is the 7th of June. So that is the purpose of wanting us to get this committee meeting done as soon as we possibly can. But I'm going to open this up to Rob to introduce and to answer some questions that members might have. And then hopefully we'll be able to get this money out as quickly as we did to the other businesses who've had, as I say, in excess of 26 odd million pounds of business rate relief so far. We'll be able to do things. And I think it's just worth pointing out and putting on record, I'm stealing your thunder here, Rob. I think it's worth putting on record that the council actually changed its payment schedules and payment runs to be able to get get that money into businesses' accounts, credited to those accounts. In some cases in less than 24 hours, which was a huge effort. Again, from IT, Revs and Bens, and all across the piece. So, you know, they're the kind of hidden heroes in the COVID crisis from within the council that, you know, have really helped to keep those businesses and those livelihoods afloat. So again, Rob, please do pass on our thanks to your staff for that, and I'll hand over to you now.
Yeah, I will, Chair. Thank you very much indeed. Okay, so the Basildon Discretionary Business Grant Scheme. A new discretionary business grant scheme was announced by government on the 1st of May, with further guidance issued on the 13th and 22nd of May. This new support is aimed at businesses that were not eligible for either of the two previous grants, which were aimed at small businesses and businesses in the retail, leisure and hospitality industry. Central government has provided us with funding, but that funding is capped at approximately £1.6 million. Central government have also set national criteria for the allocation of the funds, and in all cases the council will only consider businesses for a discretionary business grant where all of the criteria are met. Any business failing to meet the criteria will not be awarded this discretionary business grant, and the criteria is set out within the policy document which you will have. The help from this scheme only relates to businesses with business premises costs, and mobile housebound businesses do not require physical buildings are not covered within this scheme. As I said, the funding level is finite and the council cannot exceed the funding. In order to fairly administer the scheme, it was decided that awards would be determined by holding an application window. The window started Tuesday last week on the 26th of May and will run up to this Sunday evening, the 7th of June. Any business wishing to claim completes an online form on our website. It's an intelligent form. And once the application window is closed, awards will be considered against the criteria as set out within the policy. We're promoting the scheme through social media channels, Basildon Business Group, and by proactively contacting all businesses that we were made aware of that could be eligible to apply. And since Tuesday afternoon last week, and as at 4 o'clock today, we've had 187 applications so far. Officers will administer the scheme. However, as part of this report, it is recommended that it be agreed by the Section 151 officer as authorised to make technical scheme amendments to ensure that the scheme meets the criteria set by the council and in line with central government guidance. The council will operate an internal review process for applicants that are aggrieved with decisions, and reviews will be carried out by independent senior managers within a resources directorate. There are two options. Option one is to approve the local policy as set out in enclosure number 1, which is the preferred option. Or second option is do nothing, which is not recommended, as the scheme will be delivered without member oversight and based on national guidance not supported where possible by local policy. So recommendation is that the committee approve the policy as set out in enclosure number 1, and that the committee delegates authority to the council's Assistant Director for Resources to finalise and implement the Basildon Discretionary Business Grant Scheme and any requirement to amend the policy in line with government guidance. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Rob. I'll bring members in a moment. I mean, I think the wider point here is that is happening every single day across the council on a whole range of things, because the government guidance is continuously changing. And just yesterday morning, I was having a conversation with Rachel Glover in Environmental Health about the changes that are taking place in regards to going back to work and opening up workplaces for employees to go back, and how that has changed over the weekend. And officers are constantly changing policies in line with the government guidance, as you would expect, in order to help our businesses out. I do think after this, there is a group of people who have fallen through the net, and I know I've spoken to Rob and the Chief Executive about this, and they are the businesses who don't require premises. And as a consequence, we do need to think seriously about what is available to them, because as I can tell so far, the only thing that really is available is a coronavirus interruption business loan, which, although the government potentially, depending on which loan you go for, the government may pay the interest for the first year, is still it's still a loan rather than a grant. Whereas what we're talking about in all of the other areas that we've offered business rate relief, it has been a grant. There is no requirement to pay the money back. And I do think that there is a gap that we are seeing now in some of the businesses who don't have premises, who do need that help. So I would like us to keep thinking and keep lobbying the government about that. I know we are raising it with ministers when we're having those conversations, but there is support. It's obviously not necessarily business rate relief because they don't have premises, but there needs to be something that we use to help those people. Councillor Sullivan, you indicated that you had some questions.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So I'm in support of the policy, but really the main point I have is ditto the ICT item that we had earlier. 1.6 million of taxpayers' money. In this case, it's come from the government, not council taxpayers, but nevertheless still council taxpayers' money. Taxpayers' money. So again, I believe that any awards should be verified by councillors. That's what we're elected to do, etc., etc. And I think particularly in this, where you're going to be allocating to businesses, you're going to be opening offices up to challenge. It could be, people who are aggrieved that aren't getting allocations when others are. And I think really that accountability needs to stop with councillors on this one. And I would recommend, I'd like to propose another amendment to the second part of it, really. I don't know if this is 2 recommendations or 1 recommendation with 2 parts, but anyway, the second part of the recommendation to add the same wording that I did to the IT item that we had earlier. So if I could ask if there's any seconders for that, please.
Sorry, it was muted. Before we get into that, I just want to understand how the amendment would work. So obviously you're seeking to amend the policy in line with government guidance, but are you seeking to have member oversight of every single business rate grant that we put out? Because we've already done 1,900 of these, or our officers have already done 1,900 plus of these. Are you suggesting that members have oversight of any of the rest of the 1.6 million?
Well, well, for a start, I agree with the policy. So it's just a question of the implementation of it and the oversight of allocation of money. So I would prefer to see that this would go to members to vote with regard, and maybe only the ones that had the larger allocations to actually be going to in depth. But certainly, I think we need to see who is getting this money and for what reason. It could be that there's a lot of them, but nevertheless, £1.6 million, that's why we're elected to do. We're elected to oversee this. So I think a degree of oversight is necessary.
Okay, I'm just trying to get between what is policy and what is operational. That's kind of where I'm just trying to get an understanding here. So obviously the policy, which I think there's broad agreement of, we have had £27 million of taxpayer money that has been given out to 1,900 plus businesses over the last 8 weeks or so. No member has been involved in the operational delivery of that money or sat there and looked at the different businesses that have applied for it. I think what we're talking about here is something very similar. I mean, if there is wholesale, and as it says, if there is a requirement to amend the policy in line with government guidance, I mean, I would suggest that again, if needs be, staffing matters can look at it. But I'm just unsure of really what it is that you're trying to get at here, because there is an operational decision that the Revs and Bens team are going through every single day to physically hand over this money. They've been doing that for 8 weeks or so. Are you wanting us to oversee that 1.6 million? Is that what you're doing here?
Well, effectively, yes. I mean, we're delegating authority to the one officer ultimately, and I think there should be a member involvement in that decision. So, again, it could be an emergency committee, several emergency committees, or we review them all at the end. But I would like to establish the principle that there should be a member oversight of the handout of £1.6 million in his borough. It is also, as I said, to protect officers as well.
Okay, I think I'm going to bring members and officers in here, and then we can debate the amendment. First was Councillor Brown.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's a clue in our title, we're policy and resources. We put together the policy that we want to see, and then our officers through operations carry that out. We do not then come in and ask to see every piece of paper that comes across each officer's desk. Even if the practicality wasn't absolutely insane, we're talking about this amount of people that we previously helped and will hope to help in the future. To the idea that every day we're going to be sat here saying, do you agree to this? Do you agree to that? The aim of this committee is to put together the policy, agree the policy, and then for our officers to carry that policy out. It's not putting a decision in the hands of we're making the policy. I don't really get Councillor Sullivan's issue here at all. It's policy and guidelines. We've, like the leader said, we've handed out millions of pounds already to businesses. We've helped thousands of residents and businesses already. And that is an operational process. I really don't get.
Okay. Okay, Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, where do we go next? Do we have member involvement with housing benefit claims? I mean, it's crazy. If a business merits and qualifies for this business rate relief, an officer should just give it to it. If they meet the criteria, I mean, having politicians poking their nose in with claims, I mean, it reminds me of the Ronald Reagan quote. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem, government is the problem. And I think if we go down this line of micromanaging every single claim, businesses will say, why don't you do housing benefits? Why don't you do council tax benefit claims? We employ officers to be impartial, and also it's a Labour independent run council. Well, if a Conservative business didn't get his business rate relief, he could say that was politically done. At this time, businesses that merit and qualify for support should get it without any further delay.
Thank you. Councillor Harrison.
Officers, has any member to date been involved at all in any of these grant applications or allocations?
No,
sorry, go on.
No, they haven't been involved.
No.
We've followed guidance and we've updated guidance in line with the government guidance and any local policies that may apply that are already in place.
And I think that is the key in the wording of this recommendation, is that we are allowing the officers to implement this scheme and then amend the policy in line with government guidance so that the council is not operating outside of the law or outside the government guidance, which is exactly what we would expect professional officers to do, and they have done ever since. Owen, you're indicating.
I think it's worth pointing out as well that I think the government will be expecting us to pay this out as quickly as possible, and I think we'll be under some pressure to make sure that happens. So I think it is going to be time critical, supporting businesses and from external pressure as well to get paid out.
Absolutely. I think this amendment will just... Sorry, Scott, did you want to come in?
Yes, Chairman, a couple of things really. One, to give members reassurance, this is in line with we have a number of discretionary rate relief policies already that are in place that members set the policy. So this is not new business for the officers. And to again raise the point, when I spoke to Minister, we are under pressure to spend the original business rates grant. And if we do not spend anywhere near the 95% of that original grant, we may not even receive this extra 1.6 million funding. So I think what would probably be maybe to help Councillor Sullivan is to bring up a report back to show, as we've done in the past, about an update on the successful grants, any appeals, so to give you satisfaction around how officers have dealt with it. But I would urge members, in terms of where the government are pushing us to get this money out as quickly as possible, I think it would be best left, if you agree the policy, for officers to get on in line with the policy and bring you an update at the next meeting.
Okay, so I'll bring Councillor Sullivan back on to kind of wind up on his amendment. From my perspective, I can't support anything that is going to delay the vital support and monies getting to businesses in our borough, because that would potentially see some of our businesses going under and livelihoods being lost. So I can't support that. But Councillor Sullivan, you want to come back?
Okay. with regard to what the Chief Executive has just said, I think at least that gives us a degree of oversight, albeit retrospectively, and in view of the expediency we need on this, then I would withdraw the amendment in place of an amendment or some such other assurance that this would come back to the appropriate committee as soon as possible, so that we could review the allocation. So I don't know if Scott could.
Okay, I mean,
what you just said there, and then as I said, I'll be prepared to withdraw my amendment in favour of what Scott just said a minute ago.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think from my perspective, I know it was again a baffling decision about how you guys just voted in the work programme, but I thought I made it pretty clear in the work programme that we're going to have a COVID update coming to this committee every single time, and there will be quite clearly an update on business rates and on the discretionary business rates, because our businesses are just as important as the council's cash flow and residents' council tax and the local council tax support bill. So there are kind of three parts to this. There's the council, there's the residents, and there's the businesses. And our ongoing COVID updates that we will receive as a committee, we will get updates more generally. And that's why I've encouraged you in the previous item, if you do have any specific questions or things that you do want to get covered, I would encourage you to make contact with Owen in advance of the P&R meetings when COVID is going to be debated. I mean, as far as I'm concerned now, Councillor Simon, you've withdrawn the amendment from the table, so we're not. Am I right in saying that?
Well, so I've withdrawn that, but it needs to be replaced with a recommendation or a proposal along the lines that Scott provided, so that a future report comes to this committee, not a verbal one, but a future report comes to this committee where we can review it.
Okay.
In the interest of the expediency of getting these out to businesses.
Okay, well, I've got to be honest, I don't think we need a recommendation on that. We've just had a work programme conversation about it. Retrospectively, Karina can tell me whether or not we can do this, but I'm more than happy to put a report to come back in the autumn when we have a more full picture of where we are on the business rate side of things, both in terms of the original, where we've got to get to 95% for the retail and hospitality sector, and then the discretionary rate relief, but also there's about 3 or 4 other rate relief schemes as well that we might want to review. Karina, can we add that to the work programme for the autumn, even though we've obviously already taken a vote on that?
Yeah, if you've got consent in the meeting, yeah, we can put that on the work programme.
Okay.
I'll a minute that's fine.
I think we all think that's a good idea. So I don't think we need to go through the rigmarole of amendments and all the rest of it. So let's go back to talking about the substantive. Councillor Rimmer, you had indicated.
Yes, thank you. I was just going to ask in terms of the officers, in terms of the eligibility criteria for these grants, and it doesn't seem to be a straight deduction from the original government guidance. Obviously, we're varying it as a local authority. It was just in respect of the definition of the period that the business has to be struggling for. We discussed it in our group and amongst our members and people who are very business savvy in themselves. And the thought was that there's going to be some seasonal businesses that will actually suffer as a result of COVID-19 that might not be captured by our eligibility criteria, where they diverge from the government guidelines. And the other consideration was where there was 90-day invoicing as well, but actually it may look like they're doing okay during the period that's actually been indicated in our guidelines, but actually because of the drop-off in business during that period, it wouldn't actually reflect in their revenues and their profit margins and until later in the year. So it was just to understand to what extent it has actually translated directly from the government guidance, and to what extent we could actually vary that to actually ensure that no business is unintendedly missing out on this grant application process.
Okay, Rob or Owen, do you have any thoughts on what Councillor Rimmer has raised there?
Rob, do you want to do that, or shall I?
That's fine. So we have agreed with what the government said, that we know they have to demonstrate that they have suffered a significant fall of income due to COVID-19. I can't look at applications where they might be suffering in the future, they need to be able to demonstrate that over at least since the end of March, they have been suffering a significant loss of income. But again, this is discretionary pot of money, which is limited and finite. We don't know how many people will apply. We don't know how many people we will be able to help. So we will be looking at each application on its own merits based on this guidance. I think that's the fairest thing we can do at the moment.
Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you. So obviously we're going to get an update report in the future, and in terms of oversight, that's great. In terms of the policy, are we expected to actually, is this policy expected to evolve, as you said, as we find that the situation evolves as well? Will it be brought back again? Do you envisage that?
We're not expecting the policy to change dramatically, but it's dependent on government advice as it unfolds and additional guidance, and that's obviously half into that delegation. If it changes and it's immaterial, then we'll just get the payments delivered.
Okay. Any further points, Councillor Baggott?
Thanks, Chairman. I mean, first of all, I'd like to thank officers for the hard work they've put into this, and as you quite rightfully said, it is important, and it highlights that, you know, businesses could fail, so it's very important this money goes out. But of course, the very fact that it's highlighting the businesses could fail also highlights the other points that you raised, and I'm glad that you've recognised it, that there are businesses that will have slipped through the cracks. And it is important that that's addressed, and it's important, just as important, that the people that are working from home or have businesses from home that don't get this covered are looked at. And I would say that if you had listened when we suggested having a contingency fund, those people that are put in the situation now where the businesses could fail wouldn't be in that situation. So it's really important that we do set up something or look at how we support the businesses that don't fall into the remit of this, but which are in danger of going under in the meantime.
Okay. Councillor Brown.
I'm just flabbergasted by, you know, Councillor Baggott's comments. At the end of the day, these businesses are slipping through the cracks because central government have not come up with a holistic policy that supports all businesses in the way they need supporting. And thank goodness that we as a council are trying to do something innovative about that. But the issue is not around the actions this council is or isn't taking. The issue is around central government policy, which is failing many businesses and indeed residents within this borough. That is the issue.
I think, I mean, I would only add, the issue is that there isn't a very real clear view from, and there wasn't back when we started the COVID crisis, there isn't today about what this contingency fund was going to be, how it was going to be administered and how much money was going to get into it. I mean, we're talking here about, you know, we have to do, if we're going to do things, we've got to do them properly. You know, so far in the last 8 or 9 weeks, the Conservative Party have spent all of the contingency money on a council tax cut. Now you want to replenish the contingency reserve that we have. You wanted to introduce a council tax holiday, which would have meant that there was no cash flow coming into the council for a 3-month period that would have seen us going under. Now you want a contingency fund to meet the cost of the businesses that are going under or that are slipping through the net. We as a council have administered, and we will have after this discretionary policy goes through, over £30 million of business rate relief. Now, there is no way that Basildon Council would be able to fund that. That has to come from central government in order for that to work. But equally, when we are losing income and we are spending significant amounts, and you've heard it tonight, 4.2 million is what is being earmarked in regards to COVID. This idea that we can just magic up millions of pounds more money from reserves that you've already depleted and you've already spent about 3 times over in the last 8 weeks, that it's just simply not the case that the council can do it. And it's utterly disingenuous to seek to wish to pay points, political point scoring in a pandemic. I think the council has responded very, very articulately, very, very well to the issue. Myself and the chief executive continue to make the case on a weekly basis to ministers about the people who are slipping through the net about the monies that is needed, and it has to come from central government, because you cannot impoverish local councils and then empower local councils. We've had 10 years of cut, cut and cut, to the point where, irrespective of COVID, this council was facing a structural deficit over a 5-year period of about £12 million. So let's not pretend that there is some magic money tree that can just be shaken over in the corner and there'll be money available. You know, we're not the DUP. The chances are we're not going to get given that money for nothing. So I'm getting slightly concerned, slightly irritated by having to sit here and listen to this preaching argument about we would have done this, we would have done that. When the reality is the policies you wanted to implement would have depleted the contingency fund entirely, and you would have ruined the council's cash flow for a 3-month period, because, by the way, you would have still have had to pay the 70% precept to the county, and you still would have had to pay the 15% precept to the Police and Crime Commissioner, because the County Council and the PCC were not going to offer a council tax holiday. So quite how you were going to square that circle financially is beyond me. And you know, by all means, we can have these debates. I think Councillor Baggott indicated he wanted to come back before Councillor Rimmer.
Thank you, because A, you're being very disingenuous there, and secondly, you talk about us playing politics in a pandemic, which is something that we have been very clear we wouldn't do. But let's be very, very clear. They were raised as ideas and things to consider and poo-pooed out of hand. And yet you've got your group, members of your group, telling members of the public that had it come from a Labour councillor, you'd have considered it. But because it came from the Conservative Party, and when we've seen the voting of how you vote consistently against anything at every committee, no matter how well advised it is, it lends credence to that. Now, the fact of the matter is, what we said, and it was said right from the get-go, that it should be considered. I said, let's have a report from officers as to what the cost would be. Let's have a look. Let's examine it. And we were told categorically, no, we're not going to do that. So nothing to do with spending the reserves, because if an officer report had come and said that would cripple the council, that would do that, then we'd have taken a view, but at least we'd have explored it for the benefit of residents. So I'm not going to take any lessons from you about money trees when we have a look at the record of this particular administration over the last 2 years with their money tree, and their other plans and ambitions where they're growing money trees like they're going out of fashion. Thank you very much.
Okay, you're right. My voting record does show that I did vote against fleecing the contingency reserve. I did vote against any plans to bankrupt the council by offering a 3-month council tax freeze, and I'm glad that we did that. Councillor Rimmer.
I was going to say it's very unfair of you to actually, we've already heard from your officers and from our officers, sorry, actually, that people have been extending their payment periods from 10 to 12 months, that people have actually been taking council tax payment holidays where they've been in distress. I think there was no question in the proposal that was put forward but actually that the money would never be paid. I think it was actually a proposal that actually to give some people some breathing space. So this wasn't going to be money actually going to be lost to the council. As for playing politics, I think it's about time you actually acknowledge the enormous help that the government has actually given to businesses, given to the self-employed, and given to employed people. The trade unions were straight out of the blocks acknowledging that this government has responded in a way that we haven't seen since World War II to the crisis at hand, with the actual financing that has gone into this. So please, if we're talking about not talking politics on this, I think we have to acknowledge actually the good work that the government has done in this. And also when we're talking about businesses, I would plead for my residents that you actually stopped attacking businesses in my ward and actually turning up to them mob-handed and threatening them. And when the government actually benefits from the advice of SAGE. We don't actually employ a scientific officer at the council. But somehow you seem to have your own theories about lockdown and when it is suitable to ease lockdown restrictions and not, and actually your own theories on the government guidance in terms of what businesses are allowed to be open when and how they practice social distancing.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Rimmer, for that. I think you're obviously talking about the range is what you're alluding to there. I think it is slightly unfair to refer to environmental health officers as turning up mob-handed. They, of course, are perfectly entitled during this crisis, as they have done, Rachel Glover and her team, a fantastic job at touring the borough to make sure that the guidance, the social distancing guidance, was being adhered to. And thank the Lord that Rachel Glover was at the range several times over the first 6 weeks of this lockdown so that she could enforce social distancing, because that organisation and that business did not move anywhere near quickly enough to be able to protect their staff, many of whom are your constituents, and to protect their customers, many of whom are your constituents, and a part of the borough that has a higher propensity to respiratory disease than anywhere else in our borough. So I'm sure you will agree with me that it's slightly unfair to say that environmental health officers doing their job, doing exactly what they're supposed to do, is turning up mob-handed. I'm absolutely clear, and I have been in a number of correspondence, a number of the correspondence that I've had with the government, grateful to them for what they have done. This really is the moment that socialism bailed out capitalism. And you're quite right that this government is probably the most socialist government that we have had since Clement Attlee. And I'm pleased to hear so many of my Conservative colleagues come round to the idea that there is money to support people. I disagree that there has been money to support the self-employed. I still think the self-employed are a branch of the workforce that have been left out. And one of the things that we do really need to get into when all of this is over is we need to understand that in those first weeks of this lockdown, one of the things that was so blatantly obvious was how few people in our borough realised just how fragile their workplace practices were. They realised how, without even really understanding it, they didn't realise that they were themselves on 0-hour contracts in the retail sector, in our industrial estates, working in our retail parks. And I think that we have a job of work to do as a council to, when all of this is over, make sure that we raise that issue. When it comes to the council tax, I think, you know, I understand that the headlines that appear on the Basildon Conservative website are often slightly different to what appears in the story, and some tend, as we know, to be libelous. But I'm looking here now on the page that says Conservatives propose council tax holiday, council leaders to meet next week. So if you do need to get in touch, and I know you have changed titles on your page in the not so distant past because of their inaccuracy, you may wish to go back and reflect on whether or not offering that council tax holiday as your own Conservative Party, Basildon Conservative Party website suggests, was the smartest thing to do, when, as Councillor Baggott has said, it is quite clear that that would have itself bankrupted the council and ruined the council's cash flow position. I'm going to draw this to a close. I'm going to move to the recommendations and to the vote. And so members will see for themselves that the recommendation is set out. It is all one recommendation. So I'm going to kick the voting off and I am going to vote in favour. Councillor Smith?
In favour.
Councillor Brown?
In favour.
Councillor McGorran?
In favour.
Councillor Blake?
In favour.
In favour.
Oh, Councillor Blake? Blake?
I did say in favour.
Councillor Sullivan?
Is it for or in favour? Oh, in favour. In favour.
In favour.
Great. So the recommendation has passed unanimously. Thank you, Rob. Thank you, Owen, and thank you, members, for your indulgence this evening and for rearranging this meeting at short notice due to those technical difficulties. Thank you to all the members of the public who have been watching, and to all officers who have been on the call tonight. And we will do this all again in June the 23rd next month. And thank you all